Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm super excited about this episode of understanding the Bible in a year, or my journey to understanding the Bible. I don't even know which episode this one is. I think it may be like episode 10 or 11. But today we're going to be talking about chapters 36 through, I think I'm going to stop at like 44, because there's just a lot of chapters to go through, and there was a lot of things happening in these chapters. So I wanted to make sure that I gave the appropriate amount of time to each chapter as I went through it. So we stopped last time on chapter 35, and that was when Isaac died. And Isaac died at 180 years old, which was like not long after Rachel died. So now we're in chapter 36, and all chapter 36 does is basically outline one of Isaac's sons' lineage, which is Esau. It just basically goes through all of Esau's children, their children's children, the wives, where they came from, his grandchildren, everything. That's all chapter 36 goes through. Then there's chapter 37. And so basically in chapter 37, it was about how Jacob really, really loved his last two sons that were born to Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, and how the other 10 brothers really hated them hated Joseph mostly because Jacob really, really loved him. Like Jacob, his whole heart was towards Joseph and Benjamin for that matter, but mostly Joseph. And it goes into talking about how Joseph had two dreams, and both of the dreams were basically, the first one was basically explaining that his brothers were going to have to serve him, and he was going to rule over and reign over his brothers. But then the second dream was about him reigning over his brothers, his father, his mother, everybody. It was about him reigning over everybody, and that they would have to bow to him and everything. And they absolutely hated him for this. So basically Jacob had sent his son to meet his brothers, not Benjamin. Benjamin always stayed home. But Jacob had sent Joseph to meet his brothers, and his brothers ended up being in Dothan, which is where Joseph found them, and they were plotting to kill him because they thought that he was like stuck up, and since his father loved him so much, they were like, well, let's see what he does about this dream that he keep having, see if this dream get him out of this mess. So they were going to kill him, and instead Reuben pleaded with them to say, hey, no, there's no reason for you guys to kill him. How about we just throw him in a pit, and then we could tell dad that an animal ate him up, but don't kill him. Don't need to shed any blood. Don't kill him. So what they did was they took his coat off of him, and then they threw him in this ditch or this pit where there was no water or nothing. They left him there. And then I think about a little while later, some Israelites were caravanning, and they sold him to the Israelites for 20 pieces of silver. So, and then they went and they killed a goat and put the coat in the goat's blood, and then told their dad that he was killed by a wild animal. And the father was just super, 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 super distraught, and he tore his clothes, and he was in mourning for days. I mean, a long time. And so he was distraught, and he was in mourning for a long time. As a matter of fact, he was like, I don't even have a reason to live anymore. Like, I want to die. You killed my son, or my son was killed. It's not fair. My son was killed. So he was just in mourning. And the Egyptians, or the Israelites that Joseph was sold to, they basically sold him to Potiphar, which was an officer to Pharaoh, and he was over the captain of the guard. So Joseph was there, and that was basically chapter 37. He was sold to Potiphar, and they lied to their dad and said that an animal had killed him. So in chapter 38, Judah, which was one of Jacob's sons, Judah moved away from his brothers. He got married, he had kids, and his first son he named Er, and God saw him as being evil and killed him. Killed him. Then Judah, second son's name was Onan, and he told Onan to have sex with Er's wife to conceive because she was a widow. So back then that was a custom that if your brother dies, then the second born is supposed to take that person on as a wife and produce heirs. Well, Onan was like, no, I'm not having that. I don't want no babies by her, because if I have babies by her, they're not going to be my children. They're actually going to technically be heirs' children, because that also was the rule, that the babies conceived by the widow would be the heirs of the original father, so, or the original husband. So God was like, so what he did was so weird. Well, it wasn't weird now in today's time, but back then it was weird. He did the pull-out method. And so, I mean, for those that are under 18, the pull-out method, ask your parents about it, but y'all know what the pull-out method is, right? Where you get to that point and then you pull out. So God was like, oh no, we're not about to do that. That's evil. So I'm gonna kill you too. So he killed him, and that left the wife a widow. Totally. She was a total widow. And the father promised his youngest son, he was like, come live with me, and when my son becomes of age, I will give him to you as a husband. So she was like, okay, but because I'm gonna be a widow for a long time, because he's not even close to being old enough to be my husband, I'm gonna go and stay with my dad. So she went back home to her family. And Judah's wife died not long after that. So when his wife died, he was sad, but he was going, he still had to take care of his business. So he was going to a place called Enium, I think. Enium. And he was going to have his sheep sheared. But on his way there, somebody told the widow that he was going. And she was like, she was concocting a plan. She concocted a plan. So she was like, okay, I'm gonna go down here, let me take these widow clothes off, let me put on this veil, and let me put on some regular clothes, and I'm gonna sit outside the gate where he had to go on his way to where he was having his sheep sheared. And she did that, and when he got there, he saw her at the gate, but he didn't recognize her because she had a veil on and she didn't have her widow's clothes or her mourning clothes on. So he was like, hey, you prostitute, come in and sleep with me. And she was not a prostitute, but she was acting like a prostitute, because that's what they did. They sat at the gate and waited for the guys to come so that they could be summoned by the guys. So he took her in there, and when he took her in there, she was like, well, what are you going to give me to sleep with you? Like, what you giving me? I need money, I need something. What you got? And he was like, well, I don't have anything, but I'll send you a goat later. And she was like, well, until you send the goat later, I need something to prove that you're gonna send me that goat. I need something to hold on to. So I'll hold on to this, and then when you come with the goat, I'll give your stuff back. So he was like, okay. He gave her his signet ring, his cord, I guess the cord that wraps around his clothes, and then the staff that he used as he was his sheep herder's staff or whatever. So she was like, okay, thank you. They had sex. She got pregnant. Now, I don't know what kind of fertility they had back in the day, but people was getting pregnant on the first time, okay? I mean, it happens nowadays, but nowadays it's like people got to try before they get pregnant. But no. God was not playing with them. I'm sorry. My lips feel a little chapped. Better. So she got pregnant, and then a few days later he sent the goat with his friend, and the friend was to take the goat to the cult prostitute, cult whore, or whatever it was that they were considered cult, C-U-L-T, prostitute. And as you know, her payment. And when the friend got there, he was like, show me to where the cult prostitute is. And they were like, we haven't seen any prostitutes over here. No prostitutes have been here. What are you talking about? And he, inquired a few more times, and nobody knew who he was talking about. So he went back and he was like, hey, they said that there aren't any prostitutes there. So they left it at that for a little while, even though he considered it and thought about it, but they left it at that. But 3 months later, some people came to tell him, hey, your daughter-in-law has been acting like a prostitute, and now she's pregnant. So he was like, wait, what? So he went out there and he called for her to be burned. When he called for her to be burned, she sent him a message saying, I am pregnant by the person that owns this signet ring, this cord, and this staff. And when he saw the message, he instantly was repentant, because he knew that he had not given his son to her as her husband like he said that he would. So he was basically saying she was within her right to do what she did, even though it wasn't right, but she was within her right to do what she did because he had withheld his promise from her. So she was pregnant, and when she was about to have the babies, it was twins. And that was the story where the midwife had wrapped a crimson cord around the first one's hand. They stuck their hand out and she wrapped the crimson cord around, but that baby pulled his hand back in, which was Zara, I think it's pronounced Zara, pulled his hand back in, and Perez came out first. And she was like, oh, you were in a rush to get out because I wrapped the cord around the other one, and then the other one came out, and that was Zara. The first one was Perez, and the second one was Zara. So she had twins, and that was the gist of chapter 38. Scandalous, right? It's so much juice in Genesis. Y'all gotta get into this book. Okay, so then chapter 39 basically talked about Joseph after he was sold to Potiphar, and how he was put successfully in charge of the master's house. And I mean, the master left everything in his charge, didn't ask any questions, because everything that he touched was prosperous. Like it yielded fruit in the house, out the house. It was just successful. So he left him to do his job. But his wife, the master's wife, liked Joseph. She liked him. I mean, she was infatuated with him to the point where she was pursuing him every day, like, sleep with me, sleep with me, sleep with me. He was like, no, I'm not going to do it. The master left me over everything, and the one thing he didn't tell me that I could have was you. So I'm not going to do it. I'm not touching you. No, thank you. So one day he went to work at the house. Nobody else was in the house. She knew that. So she came down to where he was, and she was like, oh, nobody's here. Sleep with me. And she came over to him and like grabbed him. And when she grabbed him, he was like, up, out of here. So he ran. But when he ran, back then they only wore like little gowns or robes or whatever. So when she grabbed him, his clothes stayed behind, but he was gone. He was like, nope, I'm out of here. Gotta go. Holler. So she lied and said he tried to rape her. And when she started screaming, that he ran and left his clothes behind. So when the master heard about that, he was like, no, you're going to jail. I'm going to imprison you because you tried to sleep with my wife, tried to rape my wife, whatever. He was mad, pissed. But Joseph still found favor with God, because God knew his heart, and God knew his character. So God even gave him favor in prison, where the captain of the guard left him in charge of the prison. Like, everything that happened in the prison, Joseph was in charge of. He might have been in prison, but he was in charge of everything. Food, everything. He was in charge of everything. And they didn't even think twice about it. They left him in charge and didn't think twice about it. So that was chapter 39. Chapter 40 was what happened while he was in prison. So while he was in prison, he encountered two prisoners. One was a cupbearer or chief cupbearer, and one was the chief baker. And both of them had dreams, and while they were in there, they had those dreams, and Joseph interpreted those dreams for them. He said that the chief cupbearer would be restored in 3 days. He would be restored back to his wealth, his position, and his former glory. And the baker, he told him that in 3 days time he would be hanged, and his head would be cut off of him, and his body would be hanged or something like that. And everything that happened, but he told the chief cupbearer, he was like, I told you what your dream meant, but I just have one thing for you to do for me. Just remember me and tell Pharaoh about me when you are restored. Didn't happen. He got restored. He didn't remember Joseph. The chief baker head was cut off as well. So everything came to pass that God had revealed to Joseph about the dreams that they had dreamt while they were in jail. That was chapter 40. Chapter 41 was about 2 years later, when Pharaoh now had a dream. So Pharaoh had this one dream, and he asked all his magicians, all his soothsayers or whatever, to interpret the dream, and he couldn't interpret it. They couldn't interpret it. So then he had another dream about the same kind of things. One was about cows. One was about cows, and it was about 7 healthy cows and 7 sickly cows, and that the 7 sickly cows would overtake the 7 healthy cows. And then he had another dream about I can't even remember what the other dream was about, but it was about the same thing. It was about, something being healthy, and then 7 of the unhealthy things overtaking the 7 healthy things. And the cupbearer remembered. He was like, oh, you know what, God, please forgive me. I said that I would remember him, but I didn't. Forgive me for my sin. And he said, when I was in jail, when you threw me in jail, and then I had a dream, and there was a guy in there that interpreted my dream, and then 3 days later, the interpretation that he gave, it all happened. His name was Joseph, and he's still in prison now. I was supposed to tell you then, but I forgot, and I just asked for forgiveness. So Pharaoh was like, all right, bring him to me. So Pharaoh brought him to him. They had, cleaned him up, shaved him, everything. He, looked normal, back to normal. Okay, mind you, he was in jail for a long time. Okay, because that was 2 years after the interpretation of the first set of dreams from the cupbearer and the baker. But that doesn't tell how long he was in there before they got there. So he was in jail for a long time. So Pharaoh told him what his dreams were, and he was like, all right, do your magic. And he was like, it's not me that does it, but the interpretation comes from God. So he was like, okay, well, what did your Lord have to say? So he went on to interpret the dreams, telling him that he would have 7 years of harvest in the fields, and then 7 years of famine, and they would be severe. So the harvest will be significant, but the famine will be even greater, and that it was going to happen soon. So when he told him the interpretation, he was like, oh, I'm thankful for your interpretation, but I need somebody to spearhead, how to handle this. Like, what do we do? And he gave him a proposal and told him, as the first 7 years happen, you take a portion of that and you put it in your storehouses, and you just store it up for a fifth of whatever comes in. You store it up from all of the land of Egypt and the surrounding areas. And then when the 7 years of famine comes, you'll have grain, and you'll be able to sell grain to the other places that are experiencing famine, and your house will still be prosperous, even though you won't be touched by the famine, but you still will be prosperous. So he was like, oh, I love your proposal. Who can I get to do this for me? He was like, matter of fact, since you were the one that God gave it to, who better to execute this plan than you? I believe in you. I know that this will, work out in our favor. Have your way. I'm going to put you over the entire land of Egypt. Like, you're going to be the master over Egypt. I'm going to give you a robe, my signet ring. You want to go in my second chariot. Everybody's going to bow to you because you have total control and authority over the land of Egypt. And he gave him a wife. He changed his name. What was his name? Zephaniah. And his wife's name was Asenath. His name was Zephanath, and her name was Asenath. And he was only 30, y'all. He was only 30 years old when all of this was going down. So he was a boy when he got sold, but then he was a man when he got raised up. So he was 30 years old, and he got married and had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And he managed the famine well. Like, he managed it just like he said. God gave him favor over the land. He stored up the grains, and it was time for the famine. So that was 41. All right, now chapter 42 was where Jacob had to send his sons to Egypt because they had ran out of grain, and it was during famine time. So all the people in the neighboring cities like Canaan and everywhere else were experiencing it. So he was like, oh, go to Egypt. I heard that there's grain there. Go buy some grain. Here's silver. Go buy some grain. So he sent everybody but Benjamin. And they all went to Joseph, not knowing it was Joseph, but they all went to Joseph. And when he saw them, when they got there, they bowed down to him because he was the authority. He was the master over Egypt. And they were like, oh, we humbly bow, serve you, whatever. But when he saw them, he dealt with them harshly because he knew that they were his brothers, but they didn't know that he was the one they sold. So he was like, why did y'all come here? And they tried to tell him that they came for grain or what. He was like, you're lying. You're spies. All of you guys are going to get locked up. He was like, who are you? How many of you are there? Do you have any other brothers or whatever? And they were like, we only have one other brother, which is at home with our sickly father. And he was like, y'all spies, y'all getting locked up. And the only way that y'all will deal with me again is if you bring your brother to me. And they were like, I don't, talking to each other, like, I don't know how we're going to do this because Dad is not going to let us bring Benjamin. Like, no, he already lost one of his sons. He's not going to send Benjamin. He kept them there just in case something happened to us so that he would have a son left. So, no. So, I don't know how that's going to work. So, he was like, if y'all don't send or bring Benjamin back, then y'all not going to leave here. So then he let 3 days ride and he changed his mind. He was like, okay, you know what? Never mind. I'm going to keep one of y'all here. Send the other 9 of you back. And the only way that you'll meet with me again or get your brother back is if you bring your brother back with you, the younger one with you. And they were like, all right. So Simeon stayed behind and they all went back to their father. They told their father on their way back, they stopped at a lodging, and what happened, Joseph had the guard or the steward put all their money back in their bags, and one of them opened up his sack and he was like, wait, my money is back in here. I think it was a mistake, like something wrong happened. He was supposed to keep the money. I don't know what happened. I think it was a mistake. We're in trouble. It's not gonna go well. So they were scared. So when they told their dad, he was crying, like he was sad, he was weeping. He was like, I don't want to send my son. I don't want to send my son. I don't want to send my son. And that's how that chapter basically ended, where with him just basically crying because he didn't want to send Benjamin because they had already sold. He said, you already killed my favorite son. Now you want to send his brother, and if you send him, I'm going to die. So that was how that chapter ended. Okay. So then we're at chapter 43. 43 was about a while later after they had the discussion with their father, and then they ran out of grain. So he was like, all right, well, if you have to do this, take your brother, take our finest products, as a gift, and take it with you, and pray for God's mercy that he'll send y'all back with the grain that I'm sending y'all to go get. So when they got to Joseph, he told the steward to take them into the house and feed them or whatever. But on the way to the house, they were like, hey, I just wanted to say, I think it was a mistake, because when we got home, we saw that the silver was put in the bag or the silver was back in our bags, and we specifically gave it. So we don't know how it got back in the bag. So what we did was we brought it back, and we brought more silver, and then we have all of these presents for Joseph because we don't want no smoke. So they were like pleading with the steward, but he was like, don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has seen favor, and he must have blessed you. So he got in there, they got in there, and they were all sitting around like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. So then they let Simeon come in with them, and they were like, hey, what's going on? And he was like, I don't know. So then Joseph finally came in, and when he saw everybody, he was like, is that the son or the brother that y'all told me about? And they were like, yeah, this is Benjamin, my father's youngest son. And he was so overcome like with emotions because all of his brothers were in there that he left out crying. And then and they were all like sitting there just waiting. But then when he came back, they all ate, they all drank, and he gave Benjamin 5 times the amount of food and wine as them, because that was his blood brother, like from the same mother, same father. That was his brother. So he was super excited to see him. And so after the feast, that was basically the end of chapter 43. So chapter 44, which is where I'm going to end this video, because that's a lot to unpack, and I still have 6 more chapters to go through. So I'll do another video with the last 6 chapters. So chapter 44 was his final test to his brothers. What he did was basically put all the silver back in their satchels, gave them the grain that they came for, and then enough grain, like so much grain, he said put enough in there as much as they can carry. But then they also gave them some for the journey back home. So, but he also put his cup in Benjamin's pouch, and he told them, put it in there, and then let them go. I think it was like the next morning he let them go. But then he woke his steward up and was like, pursue them, and accused them of stealing something from the master's house. And when they, when you find it, you basically tell them that whoever stole it is coming back and they're going to be a slave. So they pursued them, and they weren't even gone that far. But when they got to them, the steward was like, what did you do? Why did y'all steal from the master? And they were like, what are you talking about? We didn't steal anything. No, we didn't steal anything. I promise you, if you find anything, then you can take that person and kill them in whoever's satchel this thing is in. You can kill them, and then the rest of us will be your slaves. And he was like, no, we won't do that, but we will take the one that the satchel that has the item in their satchel as a slave. Everybody else can be, forgiven and able to go home. So he searched, and they found it in Benjamin's stuff. They searched one by one, and they found it in Benjamin's stuff, and they tore their clothes. They was like, no, God, no, my father would die. So they went back to Joseph, and they were like, please, 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 like, we will all be your slaves. Just don't kill us. Like, so they were like, what can we do to resolve this issue? Because we cannot go back without my brother. My father will surely die. He told us specifically, if we did not come back with Benjamin, he would die. He is old. He is sick. Please don't do this to us. Please don't do this to us. What can we do to resolve this? And that was the end of chapter 44. That was the end of chapter 44. Chapter 45 is going to be amazing. I'm going to drop that in a video next, maybe this evening. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Daniel's fast, because yesterday we started our Daniel's fast, which will be another series of videos. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got some good juicy nuggets from this video. I hope that you are enjoying going through the Bible with me. That was a lot to unpack, guys. A lot to unpack, and there's so much more. 6 more chapters. So I hope you chime into the next video, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.